Before we begin, make sure there's 6 feet between each of you. No handshaking, waving to your friends. And you should be all right for this morning. Well, good morning and welcome to our legislative breakfast. We bring you the legislative breakfast each Monday throughout the legislative session. It's brought to you by the Grange, the Bridgeport Grange, and by Addison County Farm Bureau, with help from Regional Planning and the Chamber of Commerce. And as many of you may not have been to all of the sessions this year, let me explain again. We have the red light system up ahead. You get 2 minutes before the light turns yellow and then red to stop you from speaking. The answers from the legislators get 3 minutes, and we'll try to keep that in effect for the entire program. And we'd like to have you keep on topic, and then when you're ready to change topics, go right ahead, stand up. You'll all have to move to a microphone, since this is on television also, and we don't really want, it's not really good television without being able to hear what you're saying. So hollering out from the crowd won't be acceptable. You'll have to move to a microphone. If you'd like to speak, move to the microphone early, get in line, and you'll be all set. So we do have legislators here this morning, and I'd like each of them to stand and move to a microphone and let us know who they are and what committee they're serving on, and then we'll go to the questions. Peter, you want to go first?
Excuse me, Peter Conlon from Cornwall in the House of Representatives. I represent Cornwall, Goshen, Hancock, Leicester, Salisbury, and Ripton, and I sit on the House Education Committee.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in Bristol. I serve in the Senate. In the Senate, you serve on 2 committees. My morning committee is Natural Resources and Energy, and my afternoon committee is Government Operations.
Good morning. My name is Harvey Smith, and I represent the towns of New Haven, Weybridge, and Bridgeport, and I sit on the House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Committee.
Terry Norris, I serve Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. I serve on the House Ag and Forestry.
Okay, so you hear where they're from. Does anybody want to open up with the first question or move to the first topic? Nobody? And I see people here that are here for specific topics, so if you want to rise now and move to the microphone, I would very much appreciate it. Yes, come on up.
My name is John Sullivan. I'm a resident of Orwell, and my biggest gripe with the legislators is property taxes. It's now the biggest budget in my household, $18.52 per day. Per day. That eclipses my health care, my heat, my telephone, my internet combined. Is there anything that can be done about that?
It's a property tax question. Peter?
I'm not going to solve it for you, but I'll try to answer the question. So, just from one side of your property tax, which is probably the bulk of it, which is education. Just a quick explanation. What we spend on education in Vermont is funded by the state for public education. We pay various taxes into the state education fund. The fund then returns that money to communities based on what they decided to spend on education. So the education fund is essentially, it collects enough money to fund the sum total of all of the school budgets that were passed across the state. So those were passed locally, decided locally. The education fund is made up of your homestead property tax, your house and 2 acres basically, non-residential property taxes. So the homestead makes up about 1/3, non-residential property taxes make up about 1/3, and then 1/3 comes from other taxes, the sales tax is in there, all of it, part of the rooms and meals tax, lottery proceeds, and a few others. So ultimately the challenge is that if the bulk of your property taxes is education, and education is decided locally. The legislature's in a tricky position, I guess you could say, because we don't decide what gets spent out of the education fund. People are wary of Montpelier taking control of that. It's decided locally, but yet it needs to be funded at a state level. So that doesn't quite answer your question in terms of what can be done about it unless we are willing as a state to have the state say we're going to take more control of how education is funded, to what level, and how much is raised for it. Again, it's a local decision, but funded by the state. It's an odd system that you don't find various places, but it respects the sort of local decision-making process. I apologize that it doesn't reduce your property taxes, but it's a hard one. The other one, your property taxes, of course, is your municipal tax, which is also decided locally.
Does that not alarm anyone else, that state taxes have become your highest expense? Your health insurance doesn't come up to that. The remainder of your budget, your food, your travel, your whatever, it just doesn't come up to that. I mean, it's totally out of hand.
Move to a microphone if you want to speak.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, my brother says the same thing. He's retired, paid off his mortgage. His biggest bill is his property tax. That's down in Connecticut. But I try to do a little math. Okay, I never went to public school, but all my kids, 3 boys, public school, I figure cost $120,000, $150,000. I never would have had that. How could I possibly pay that? Put 3 boys through college for $40,000, $30,000 a year. So I thank the taxpayer for that. Okay, and my dad paid double, as I said. Went to parochial schools. He paid his property taxes. I never heard him complain like that, because he was at Guadalcanal. Okay, and I think when he came back, he said, wow, the government can do good things. And education is a good thing. Personally, and I confess, I did teach in public school for years. I have to say the Vermont taxpayer has been generous to young people. They're so rare and precious in this state. And I realize you can't keep that up forever. But education is a common good. Okay, my boys are doing fairly well. And what could we possibly do without it? It's a common good. It's a good thing to fund, all right? So, I know $20 a day seems like a lot. Not with the way inflation takes over. So, I have no complaints about the property tax, and I don't think a lot of people do.
Move to the microphone.
So I'll just add, appreciate the expense. I mean, every person I talk to feels like their budgets are under pressure, and the legislature is sensitive to that. There is, I don't know if you have used it or gone through the math to see if it works for you, but there's a provision that we call it income sensitivity. So yes, you pay on a property, it's a property tax that is used for education, but it's also capped at roughly 2%. And so, and there's actually a so-called circuit breaker at a lower level than that for incomes, I think, of $48,000 a year and under. So we try to make sure that it doesn't rise to basically more than 2% of someone's income. Any percent is a burden, but as Andrew said, you know, since the 1777, we've put the right to a public education right into our Constitution. We've always agreed that it's the basis of having every citizen be informed and educated in order to be a active participant in community life and the democracy we're all supporting.
Okay.
Tim Davis, North Ferrisburg. I just did a quick calculation for this gentleman. It's over $6,700 a year. I'm not sure how many acres he has, but I'm paying roughly over $6,800 a year on 1.3 acres. Okay? I've got 2 kids going through elementary school and high school here. And if I went to get health insurance on the current healthcare exchange without paying for a $5,000 deductible, or I believe it's an $8,500 out of pocket, it would cost me about $483 a month just for myself. That comes to $15.58 a month, 58 cents a month, before I pay for a $5,000 deductible. Okay, let's do the math. 483 divided by 31 equals 1558.
A day, not a month.
That's per month, right? I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I just divided that by 31. That's per day. My apologies. Yeah, per day. I was trying to go apples to apples and I misspoke. So that's $15.58 a month before you meet a $5,000 deductible or an $8,500 out of pocket on 1.3 acres. Okay? I work with Medicare, Medicaid, fully aware of all the programs that are available to help folks, and I'm not sure how many acres this gentleman has, but just like to say we're all in this boat together as far as property taxes are concerned, and trying to encourage people to bring more kids into the system to offset an aging population and an aging housing stock would be probably in our best interest. Thank you.
Same topic. Same topic. I've been doing a lot of number crunching lately, and one of the things that I think we can do is look at the costs that go into paying for our education. And one of the really big costs is health care. So across the state, we pay for health care for approximately 42,000 employees. And if you look at how many we pay for even state employees, there's probably another 13,000 employees. So we're paying that, right? We're paying their health care. And if on average, they're basically, you know, because it's family plans, that whatever, it's easily that we're paying $12,000 a year for that. That comes up to over $0.6 billion that we're paying in health care. So our healthcare system's really broken, and as that goes up 10-12% every year, if we don't tackle it, even at the state level, if we can't do it at the federal level, we're going to, you know, basically go down the tubes, because that's a big piece. It's really the problem. And, you know, it's a hard thing to tackle, but that would actually make a big difference if we could get the big profit out of healthcare and you know, not having to be paying 30% for administration costs, which is what it is, because it's so complex. So there is something we can do. But it's going to really take diligence, and I think it's something that if we can't do it at this federal level, we're going to have to tackle it at the state level, because we're not going to have any schools left, you know, little schools left. You know, it's going to be devastating.
Now, just to clarify, that's health insurance,
Health insurance.
not health care.
That's what I meant, health
Okay.
insurance. Thank you, thank
I
you.
want to make sure that that's understood.
Thank you. It's early.
Who's the speaker? She didn't introduce herself.
And who are you?
I'm Barbara Wilson.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
It's early.
Back on taxes, Bob Zeal of Bridgeport, back on property taxes. You know, we pay a lot in property taxes. I'm not going to say we don't. I'd like to pay less. But we have to remember that this state, and Chris mentioned it, in our Constitution, I believe our Constitution is the only state constitution that says the state is responsible for quality health care. And this came to a crux 20 some odd years ago in Whiting here, with that suit, with the little girl in the suit, which says rich towns and poor towns. And that forced the state to recognize it had to comply with the Constitution. So that's why the state got involved with paying property taxes and is the funnel for all education taxes, because they wanted towns like Whiting to have equal education to towns like Shelburne and Norwich over there. So and here in Shoreham. So what that did is, that's why the complexity of our property taxes and education taxes, because it pulls all this money. And what this means is that from a statewide standpoint, we have pretty good education statewide. Everybody reads about how cheap it is, education is elsewhere in other states. Well, what they're talking about is in some counties, they have crappy education. They have one teacher for 40 students and not many facilities. Then in the rich suburbs, they have fancy schools where they can pay for it. So there's really very unequal education. So when you hear how cheap it is elsewhere, pay attention to what you're actually hearing, okay? Because I'm not sure it's comparing apples to oranges. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm totally happy with how much we're paying for education. I think it can get a better and hopefully even cheaper, but I just don't want to have everybody feel that we're off the rails here. Excuse me.
Okay. And Ruth Hardy has joined us. Senator Hardy.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. With my normal apologies to being late at the legislative breakfast. As I have said to many of you before, Mondays are the only days I have to get my kids off to school, and I have 2 teenagers at home, and today was the first day after daylight savings, so it was particularly difficult. Apologies for being late, but thank you for having me, as always. I love that we are in the library. I love libraries. I just heard what Bob said and Barb said about education finance. I serve on the Education Committee and also the Agriculture Committee. I don't know, I didn't hear a specific question from either of them, just obviously comments about our education system financing and funding. But I do want you to know that we, the Senate Education Committee, is looking at a study that came out actually on Christmas Eve. It's called the Pupil Weighting Study. In our education funding formula, we count students differently depending on the type of students they are. For example, high school students are weighted heavier because they tend to be more expensive to educate because high schools have more programs and specialized classes. And students who are living in poverty, students who are English language learners, and students who are preschool students actually are weighted lower, but students in poverty and English language students are weighted heavier. So we commissioned a study. I see that, but I'm going to finish what I'm talking about. We commissioned a study a couple of years ago that looked at how we weight those students and if we were doing it appropriately. And it turns out that we weren't. The funding formula for the weighting of students hasn't been updated in well over 20 years. So we are looking at that study, which made recommendations for significantly changing the way that we count pupils. And we're looking at whether or not we should implement the recommendations. There's a public hearing this Wednesday from 4 to 6 at the State House, if any of you are interested in coming. And I'm happy to answer questions about it and also talk after if you want more details. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruth. I just did a quick calculation of my property taxes. Just under $32 a day. I think I'll trade with you. Harvey?
Yes, I think we spent quite a lot of time defending our education funding system as we have it today, but I don't think we've addressed your question directly, and that is, when we created Act 60 years ago, that created a system where we continued to grow substantially in our cost of education. But I like what Senator Hardy just said about a study that comes out and take a relook at the funding sources. But the number one issue I hear when I talk to my constituents is the property taxes and how it's becoming very unaffordable to live here in our communities. And I think that's a big issue. That's something that we really need to find a way to address. We created Act 60. It was based on the Brigham decision that said that we needed to fund our education resources equitably across the state. And I think I just heard that we haven't reached that goal. So we need to go back and look at this, because it is becoming very unaffordable for a lot of people, including myself.
Thanks, Larry. It just struck me that the equity thing, if one person pays $18, another person pays $30 a day, is that equity? Any answers from the legislators? How does that work in?
So the definition of equity is a challenging one to get to, and it depends on a lot of factors. Generally, when we talk about education equity, we're talking about not about we're talking about the students and whether or not they are receiving an education that is substantially equitable based across the state, regardless of where they live. So do they have the same educational opportunities? Do they have the same quality of education? Do they have the same chance for a good outcome in their education? It's something that we struggle, and I just am seeing Representative Conlon here. I didn't notice that you were here before, sorry. And it's something that we struggle with all the time in the Education Committee, and something we struggle with on school boards themselves about whether or not we're providing a substantially equitable education for our students. As Mr. Zelliff noted, we have a constitutional mandate at the state level to provide an equitable education to students regardless of where they live. And in terms of taxpayer equity, that's usually measured on the ability to pay and whether or not you are able to afford it based on your income and your wealth. But that is at the other end of the spectrum. So that's why we have in this state, a fairly progressive tax system that allows people at the lower end of the income scale to pay less and people at the higher end to pay more. That's a little bit different for property taxes because it's based on the value of the property. And then there are built-in income equity measures for property taxes. If you make less than a certain amount of money, you get a property tax rebate. So happy to talk more about that, but equity is a hard thing to define, and it's something we struggle with and try to reach all the time. It's really a goal, not an end point at this point.
Are you still on the same topic, Mr. Bowman?
Yeah.
Okay, go right ahead.
This is Mark Bowman, Addison, Vermont. I wasn't planning on talking on this, but the Constitution says that everybody has the right to contribute proportionally. It doesn't say proportionally to what. Now, there's a rule, I don't know where it comes from, I think it's something that's been there, is that no system is ever right. You have to pick a system that works, and when you come to proportional, it used to be that the amount of real property somebody held was proportional to their wealth. Now we have more people hold more of their wealth in financial instruments and stuff, and they are not getting taxed. The income sensitivity is a way at addressing that partially, but not really adequately. If you were to charge people on their total net worth, the stock market just took a big tumble. How could you do that? So what we have to understand is that there is no perfect system, but I think one of the solutions we should be looking at is increasing the number of taxpayers. We pay to educate these people to go to school, but then they don't have jobs available because we have such a restrictive environment for job creation in this state. They leave the state. We invest in education, but if you don't have the back door where these people to get the return from these people you educated by having them stay as taxpayers, we're never going to solve this problem. We're going to downward death spiral. Thank you.
More on education, or if you want to change topics?
I'm Bob Burton in Cornwall. A couple of issues on this. One that I'm seeing is a waste, and that we fund things that perhaps are not necessary in education. And I'll go back to a couple little incidents. One, I had some stepchildren a few years back, and they had a home and home with Maine, and Vermont sent my stepchildren to Maine for their little event in Vermont Transit. And the Maine kids came here in yellow school buses. And everybody said, oh, well, it's just a contract and there's no cost. You can't run a air-conditioned Vermont Transit Greyhound type bus for the same price you can run a school bus. That's just one little example. We have some other things that are in our legislation that came back out in the 60s, which a gentleman probably knows more about this than I do, but we no longer are allowed to give money to education systems that don't fit a certain standard. And I can remember in Cornwall, we had parents sending kids to Rice High School, which was giving them a great education for less money than we could. We sent the excess to Middlebury High School, which spent it on whatever they want, which was the big buses to haul the kids to Maine. So I think we have a real disconnect here in how we're allocating those assets and whether they're going to value for the kids or whether they're pumping up something. I think there's a misapplication and possibly a disconnect between the people we elect and the people that run the system. And in the old days, when my father was on the school board, the town did it. And then people could get right after whoever was spending the money. So there may be a place where we start looking back and take it away from the state. We still need to fund the schools so that they're all equal, so every kid gets the same education. But when parents get choice, and that choice is funded, and you don't have to subsidize the parochial schools, but there are ways to match it up so that a bonus doesn't go to our local high schools and the parents get stuck with a bill because they really want their kids to go to a better school.
Yes.
I'm Terry Williams, I'm from Poultney. I'm not from Addison County, but thanks for inviting me.
Welcome.
Act 60 and then Act 68, the reason they were designed was to equalize all the school systems. Well, a lot of the school systems that were doing very well, their students went other places that some of the poorer towns couldn't. They took programs away from them. And then they took the ability for school systems to be able to fundraise so that, and put back in the system, and I don't think that was right. Act 46 was supposed to save us money by unifying school districts. In my school district for the last 2 years, it's gone up $1 million each year. 930 students in three town schools. And now we're going to be putting 3-year-old to pre-K into the school systems, and we're going to be shutting down these mom and pop operations that do preschool and childcare, and I don't think that's right either. And this isn't really what I came here to talk about, but if anybody wants to talk to me, I've got an idea how we can reduce property taxes for education. Poultney pays 70% of their property taxes from their budget. I'm on the town select board. And 70% goes to education, and our kids in Poultney High School, when they graduate, they're graduating and reading at a 7th grade level. So I think that what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is that the quality of education isn't there anymore. And yeah, we got a problem getting students in, so there's a problem with a cost per student. We're paying $18,000 per student, and a lot of those students that are in schools are special education, which they need to be in the system, but everybody here has friends or relatives that are teachers, and nobody wants to see them hurt as far as their pensions go. So, thank you.
Senator Hardy, I can see you bursting.
Well, I don't, there wasn't a specific question there. I just want to, I just want to respond to the sort of general feeling. I mean, it's, we have a lot of work to do for sure in our education system, and we can always do better. Like I said before, the sort of striving toward equity is a sort of ongoing process, and striving toward quality and making sure that we're serving our kids well is an ongoing process. I have kids in the local schools, and they're getting an excellent education, and we have really super dedicated and high-quality teachers in our schools. And our school boards are doing a really, really incredibly difficult task right now of trying to budget for an excellent education for our kids. And I don't see the waste that you're talking about. I think that there is, I think that there is that type of thing. There may be certainly individual examples that people can point to, but overall, I think our state is doing a good job of trying to create an excellent education with fairly limited resources. And as Barb mentioned, the cost of healthcare is always an issue, and we have tiny little schools, and tiny little schools are more expensive because they are not able to get the sort of efficiencies, economic efficiencies. And so we're struggling with what do we want in terms of our value of our schools. So as a mother of kids in our schools, I just want to assure you that our schools are doing a really good job for the most part, and we have an excellent high school. The Middlebury High School is an excellent high school. So I just wanted to defend our local schools as one of the few people in the room who probably have kids in them right now. So, thank you.
Do you want to come back up? Sure.
If I could briefly.
All right.
I think this is pertinent. Again, Tim Davis, Ferrisburg. I just had this conversation actually yesterday with a good friend of mine who graduated 2 daughters from Rice. And I know Mount Abraham is suffering under the weight of a lot of repairs coming up. I think he said that, and I thought the number is a little higher, but it's something like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, please, but roughly $18,000 a year to graduate a high school student from Mount Abe. And I think it was costing him $14,000 to run his kids through Rice. Okay, so it's less expensive to bring your kids to go to Rice. And you're nodding, you agree, yeah. But Rice doesn't have transportation. So luckily this gentleman, who's a good friend of mine, has the economic means and passive income so he can drive his daughters, pick them up. In addition to them playing sports, he can shuck them back and forth to Rice High School. They also don't have, as the last I checked, Rice doesn't have special education, right? They're not putting the kids that are at the lower end of the income or learning scale with an individual's special ed teacher. That's an immense savings. I work in the insurance business. That's sort of what you call cherry picking, meaning you can always take a private school, can pay their teachers less, they can not take the students, and those students are left where? In our public school system. So that's when you get what's called negative selection.
Okay. Yes.
I'm George Gross from Shoreham. Yeah, I resonate with the negative selection issue. I just happened to be born in 07090, zip code that was very affluent and had a very superior school system, one of the best in the state of New Jersey. The next zip code over, if I had been born there, I would not have achieved as much in life because the school system there was decisively inferior. It was a very poor community, and teachers and the school system were not at the same standard. So I find Vermont's system, even though it's more expensive apparently to fund, is one that actually demonstrates what's possible if everyone puts their shoulder to the wheel and gives everybody a fair share. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a rural community that's poor or an affluent community, all students receive a fair and equitable opportunity to succeed. And that's an essential principle for all of us. I think my question to the legislators is, when are you going to tackle the healthcare issue in the education budget? It's currently north of $600 million a year. And I believe it's going up 10 to 15% this coming year. That makes it north of $6 $650 million, and that monster's eating up the budget. Local to this school district, there's been a movement by the supervisory union to evaluate the schools for closure, and that's motivated by the belief that there's going to be savings to be made in the budget by closing rural schools. That, frankly, is one way towards disaster. I think the local schools are a central part of our cornerstone in our rural communities, and with the consequence of closing them, there's a lot of negative implications for that. So instead of closing the schools, I think the real issue should be focused and directed to the healthcare issue, which is driving the motives for closing these other schools. If it wasn't for that pressure on the budget, they probably wouldn't be considering it the way they are.
Legislators?
You want to take that one,
Peter?
Well, I don't have an answer here because solving healthcare is a major factor that's a national problem. Vermont studied going to an all-payer model several years ago under Governor Shumlin. I think it would have resulted in a 15% payroll tax in order to have a universal healthcare system in our state. For better or for worse, the powers that be at that time said that that is not the route that Vermont should go down, that the economic shock of that would be too much. There were a lot of underlying complicated problems, such as not everybody would have to do it, so therefore you wouldn't have everybody all in due to federal rules. But unfortunately, I'm not sure our state government can solve health care, which is a problem as big as you described, without there being some federal participation in that or some federal way of doing things. So I agree that healthcare is a major problem. There are some solutions out there. I mean, the state has its OneCare program, which the idea is you pay doctors to keep people healthy rather than paying doctors to treat people when they're sick. That has a lot of potential if we can get everybody into it, but without more people participating, I'm not sure that that's going to prove to be a major savings in our state healthcare system. So it's a major burden. It's why it is being debated at the national level in our presidential campaign so vigorously. But I'm not sure we can solve it at a state level without there being a significant shift in the economics of how we do things.
Let's see if somebody wants to change it down.
Senator?
One thing by way of encouragement, I think these conversations are difficult and they can be discouraging, but I think I want to remind us all we have Dr. Dinosaur, so universal primary care for all children in the state, and we've been doing it since the 1980s, and it's been cost effective and has helped. It's such a successful program that people forget that we've achieved something that many other places don't have. Again, so universal primary care, but for children. We've talked about in recent years being able to extend the same model to people of all ages, and I think that's still something worth exploring further, because so much money is saved when the Stitch in Time Saves 9 saying that probably everyone grew up with is just as true in medicine as it is in other things. And there are, I think, options for Vermont to explore a universal primary care regardless of age, and then thereby reduce the number of people who end up going into far more expensive care later on with more serious symptoms.
Okay. Nope. Any new topics that anybody wants to bring up? Okay.
With the old one for 1 minute. Thank you. After 8 years of active duty flying combat aircraft, I took the GI Bill and went to the University of Vermont College of Medicine and practiced emergency medicine for 30 years. And I don't like what I see. We have a leader at the University of Vermont making $2 million a year to run a system that's been in place for who knows how many years. When I started, a little later than the rest of the guys, but when I started, physicians and nurses ran hospitals. They drew the same pay as the guys on the street that were doing the work. And they ran them efficiently. Today we see huge bureaucracies running hospitals. I see the same thing happening in the education system when we compare our cost of education to other states. Now some people can say, well, they're lousy states, they don't do a good job. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that we have kids that can't read in this state, so there's a problem there. So what I'm seeing is costs that don't yield results. And when one guy walks out of this state, and we have golden parachutes, by the way, if anybody remembers the stuff that's happened over the last 30 years or so, where somebody leaves the state of Vermont in one category or another, and man, they get a bundle the taxpayers have to fund. So that is what I see, is we do not have control of our bureaucracy. Somebody else could take it from there.
Okay, new topics?
No, same topic.
Same topic, okay.
But a note of optimism. Shoreham is up to 100 kids. The cost per kid to educate in Shoreham is less than Mary Hogan this year. Yes. Why? Because we have new businesses. We have Whistle Pig, we have Tata Harper, we have young people coming into Shoreham. This is not happening elsewhere in the state. Can the legislation do something, legislators, to encourage rural Vermont?
Senator.
Former Representative Stevens is here. He can, I'm sure, chime in and help fill out the picture. So, Will, no, I say that because Will and I served together in the House Agriculture Committee, and there were a pair of bills came through programs back to back. First one was called Farm to Plate. The second one is the Working Lands Enterprise Group. They're focused on building opportunities in rural Vermont based on our farm, food, forest economies. And they are strongly, it's looking at what the unique assets of the state have and then how we can use them to develop place-based businesses. So you mentioned Whistle Pig, but we have, well, I know the Farm to Plate numbers better. So when they did the report roughly a year ago, and they had shown in a decade that we'd added 842 new businesses in the food and agriculture sector. So everyone knows probably that Vermont has added many, many breweries, and some of those, the hops being used in those breweries are being, for the first time in a long time, grown in Vermont. We have people who are growing the grains that go into those distilleries. And it goes on and on, all the way through the whole food and beverage system. So the numbers were 842 new businesses, 7,700 more jobs, and over $400 million worth of new income in the state. And it's based on many businesses of many different sizes, many of them small, many of them in rural Vermont. And then on top of that came the Working Lands bill, which really brought forestry into the picture much more clearly. And then that program says for these businesses that are being started and explored in the farm to plate world, they're going to need technical assistance, they're going to need money to get going, and there are grants through the Working Lands Enterprise Board to help fund those at strategic moments to help give them a boost. They still have to make it on their own, figure things out, find a real market, and succeed in the marketplace. And I think I'll just pause to say one more thing about that, and that is milk is a very difficult way to make a living. It has a, when you're in a co-op that says, if you make however much milk you make, we will take that milk and quote unquote find a home for it. That's different than if you're making a product and you need to go find your own customers. So the challenge there is when all the milk you make will be taken by a co-op, but placed at the lowest, basically the government program is to place it at the lowest cost. Their goal is to achieve a safe, adequate supply of milk, not a safe, adequate supply that pays farmers fairly for having produced the milk. for the non-commodity products that we're talking about in that sort of farm-to-plate working lands universe, they need to find people, willing buyers who are willing to pay a price that lets them succeed. And I think that's part of the challenging transition that's going on all over the state right now, as we see a shift from heavy reliance, roughly 85% of total ag proceeds were related to dairy, and that percentage is dropping as other things come up.
Thank you, Senator. New topics?
Well, can I weigh in on this too?
Go ahead.
So just adding to what Senator Bray said, and by the way, Senator Bray has a button that he wears to every legislative breakfast that says "Be optimistic," and so I appreciate that and want to add some optimism to his just optimistic answers. You're right that Nick, that Shoreham is booming, and it's really exciting to see. And the school is doing great, and the community is doing great, and I love to come here. And three things I want to say to that is, one, that I know that Will has worked with many others in the community about potential downtown housing development. I was happy to write a letter of support for a grant that the town just received to study the potential of some housing close to the center of town, and I think that will be even add to the boon in the town. So that's certainly one answer to your question, is in rural communities, how do we find affordable, sustainable housing close to the center of town? And Shoreham is doing that, and I think that's really exciting. So that's one answer. The second is we are in a library, as I mentioned before, and a lot of our small towns have really wonderful libraries. And I have worked to try to find a way to better support libraries. And I introduced a bill, and it passed in Senate Education, and it will pass tomorrow on the Senate floor and go to the House, about creating a status report of public libraries, actually schools, public and university libraries in the state of Vermont. Libraries are often centers of both social and economic activity in our small towns, as you can see from this building that we're standing in, and all the wonderful opportunities that people in Shoreham have in this building. So that's another thing for small rural towns, is to make sure that they have strong libraries. And then the third thing, just sort of adding to what Senator Bray said, is that I've worked on a bill that would provide incentives for school districts to buy more local foods. And this would enable our schools to be able to support our local farm community, buy more of Will's carrots and squash and tomatoes, and feed them to kids in the Shoreham school, so that they are able to support our farmers and also provide better meals for our schools and our kids in those schools. So that will hopefully pass out of the Senate Agriculture Committee this week. So those are three things: libraries, local foods, and affordable housing. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Norris jumped up.
Just a couple of comments on the House Ag Committee. We are big supporters of Farm to School, and the Governor has included another $750,000 in the budget for working lands, and when we sent our letter of recommendation to the appropriations last week, I think we wanted to move that up to about 1.5 million, because working lands is such a successful enterprise in Vermont. And also just want to take a little credit for Whistle Pig. That was my farm that I sold to Raj, and I was a big supporter of that, and I held a note for quite a lot of money for a couple of years to get him started. So I'm just glad that it's doing so well. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Are we changing subjects?
New topic.
Okay, great. Go right ahead.
I'm Jeff DeSorda, born and raised in Orwell, and recently, 9 years ago, moved to Benson after 41 years in Orwell. so kind of local to the area. I really wanted to talk a little bit today about some of the things that's going on in our hunting and fishing community. We talked a little bit previously. People have been talking about work in landscapes, and there's nobody more connected to the work in landscapes in Vermont really than the hunters and fishers and people that enjoy the great outdoors of Vermont. My family has always been connected to that. We're maple sugar producers in Benson and always have been in Orwell. And we also raise bear hounds, and we're very active hunters and such. So there's a bill in right now currently, 321, that will really essentially end that for us with the language that's in there. Which is very disappointing, because I think we talk about, keeping people here in Vermont, and we add that on top of, having taxes raised and taking away our rights and the enjoyment, the things that we do here in Vermont and what keeps us here is being constantly whittled away, in my opinion. So it's really disheartening, because it's only a matter of time. We take away hunting with bear hounds, and what's next? What's the next thing? It just seems like every year there's something new that comes along. So, that's it.
Anyone like to comment on the bill?
Sure. So thank you, Mr. DeSorda, for coming. I met with Mr. DeSorda and other bear hound hunters. I think it's 2 weeks ago today. Maybe it was President's Day. Spent a couple hours in the State House on a quiet Monday afternoon talking more about it. So let me state from the outset that the bill seeks to we are perpetually revising bills and programs, laws, programs. One of the areas that came up, it came up last summer, and then it came up again this fall, is over the notion of expectations around control of hounds. So it's the bill is not anti-hunting. It's what it's trying to address is what's the balance between all of us living together and our expectations about how people will manage hunting hounds that are out on that working landscape. So right now what we're doing is reviewing the definition. There was, I think probably people may be aware that in this past fall there was an unfortunate and I think unusual incident where bear hounds encountered a couple in Ripton on a national park land, a national forest land, hiking with their dog on a leash. They scooped up their dog. Both members of the couple were knocked down by those dogs. The dog and the people were bitten. No one is happy that happened. And the challenge is, if you look at the law, it says that the dogs were quote unquote under control, because the definition of control says if you're wearing a GPS collar, you're under control legally. But I don't think any of us who would witness such a thing or just even hear about such a thing would say that meets a regular person's reasonable understanding of what we mean by control. So it's expectations around how we respect each other's rights to be out in the woods, enjoying those lands. So what we are working on currently is looking at opportunities to come up with a reasonable redefinition of control that seeks to let people who want to be out hunting with hounds, pursuit hounds, continue to do that, but also make sure that those who are out on that landscape not be subject to something like what happened this fall.
Terry Williams from Pulteney. I'm the Southern Vice President for the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, and I've been a hunter all my life. I used to hunt with coons. Can't control hunting dogs. And the question I got for you is, how many people have actually, why did somebody bring this bill up? How many people complained about it?
How many people, I'm sorry.
Why did somebody bring this bill up?
There's been a discussion in the building for, I'd say, at least 2 years. As a matter of fact, I serve on a committee that meets year-round. It's called the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So there are many rules written, for instance, Fish and Wildlife rules, they have to come back. The legislature has a committee of 8, House and Senate, that says, reviews each rule as it comes through and said, does that rule meet the expectations of the legislature when they passed the underlying law that created the rulemaking? When the bear hound rule came through this summer, I asked the question of Commissioner Porter. I said, this definition of control, because I've worked with hounds in the woods, I said, you know, it seems as though the hounds could be a mile to even further away from the handler, and they would still, quote unquote, legally under control. And he said, yes. So I think most of us think of control as something much more concrete than simply knowing where your hounds are. So that's the point behind it.
My point is that we continue to see our Sportsman Bill of Rights whittled away by the legislature. And the people that actually, they're in this room right now, go talk to the people in your community and get them involved, make them aware of the issues. Because when something like this comes up and the constituency isn't even aware of it, then we're always dealing from behind the power curve. If we can't be proactive if we don't know that these issues are coming up. And unless you watch the Legislative Journal every day, a lot of bills are being enacted that the people don't know about. And I don't think that's right. That's why I'm involved there.
So thank you for encouraging people to be involved. So I'll just say a couple of things. Again, the issue was raised last summer, and it was discussed during the prior session. So there's been a conversation going on for well over a year. So it's not like it Jack in the Box, you know, it's popped out. The other thing is that we have a legislative website. So I agree, it is not that easy to follow everything going on in the State House. There are 1,300 bills right now, and no legislator knows them all either. You have to, through committees of jurisdiction, through reference, through people who are in a group like the Sportsman's Federation. You have Mike Covey in the building, keeping an eye on things every single day. And that's just the nature of a very short, intense legislative session, is that we all have to work. But the legislative website provides a window into every single draft of every single bill as it develops on a daily basis. So all the testimony we receive, pro and con on any issue, it all goes up, you know, with just like the voter's oath, without fear or favor. We try as hard as possible to hear from both sides, all sides on an issue, invite people in, sort of equal time. Is it perfect outcomes? No, but we do try to make it like as sort of fair and open as like a town meeting proceeding.
And I don't envy the legislators, their job either. It's very difficult to deal with everything that comes down, but I had a representative from Chittenden that put in it was going to be a bicycle safety helmet law. And I walked up to him and I said, why did you put that bill in? He said, because I had one of my constituents ask me to do it. Well, if you got 3/4 of the people that are out there don't agree with it, but one person that actually came to the representative and said, hey, I want you to write a bill for this, that's a little bit of an unfair balance, I think. So my point is that we can't even get our sportsmen, because they're all working 2 jobs to pay their bills and pay their taxes. We can't get them even come out and vote because there's not even an issue on the ballot that they're concerned about. So we need to talk to our people in our communities and get them involved in the process, because those are the issues they're going to come out and vote for. Thank you.
Harvey?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up. I sit on the House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Committee, and it's almost 100% that bill will be coming our way, and we'll be taking it up. There's 2 incidents this last year, I think in this last year, that caught my attention. I want to say that I'm a property owner. I own several hundred acres on my farm, and I have folks that hunt with dogs every year come and ask permission if, you know, they can hunt on our property, and, you know, I give them that permission to do that. So that's a first responsible approach, is to make sure the landowners know that you're there and that what kind of hunting you're doing. and I appreciate that. And but I have a question as whether all the landowners would agree to that in the same proximity, and you know, what happens in those situations. There was one in the town of Bridport where one of the farmers called me and was very angry that somebody had been hunting. I think it was with dogs, but I'm not sure now that I think about it. But anyways, a coyote, yeah, I'm sure it was dogs, and a coyote had come onto this property, and all of a sudden there was all kinds of hounds around there and hunters around there, and they got very close to the facilities, and you know, it was really a sad experience for those involved. And here's people that, same as myself, always open their property to hunt in and allowing that. And very angry with the fact that the hunters, and in this case, you know, the dogs had free rein, and there wasn't any fence around the property, any parameters. So there are some issues like that that come up to bring it to our attention that we need to readdress this issue. Then there was the incident that Senator Bray was talking about, where folks were hiking on a public trail, and some bear hounds came by, and it ended up not being a friendly experience for them. And I don't know any of actually what happened and what precipitated that, and I'm interested in hearing from the hound owners to find out, you know, what we can do. I've also talked to the commissioner about this as well, and trying to find out, but these are the kind of things that bring things to our attention. Before that, I think that hound hunting was pretty much not on people's minds, but right now it comes to the forefront, and there's got to be some way to address that. We need to understand what it is. I don't want to do away with hound hunting. It's a tradition we've had in the state for, you know, a couple hundred years or more, and it's something that's a culture of Vermont, and I really don't want to do away with that. But on the other hand, I think we need to find some kind of ways to address the issue.
Thanks, Harvey. I gotta ask a question of, I haven't seen the bill, so I don't know what it says, but what, for the rest of us, what does it do? What does it restrict? I need to know, you know, you're allowed to have them a mile out now, and it's gonna be something else, or?
Okay, so the bill, S321, so you can go on the legislative website, download that bill, take a look. It's actually an omnibus bill, includes a variety of provisions, but there is one section that relates to hunting bears with hounds. And the two major things under discussion are, it really boils down to, well, two things. One, how long is there a training season, and if so, how long? What months of the year can you be out? Running hounds that will be running bear, but not, you can't take those bears because there's no, it's not hunting season yet, so training. And the other piece of it relates to the definition of control. So what does that mean to be in control? And so I was talking about GPS collar is sufficient to meet one of the definitions of control, and then we're saying, is that enough? Does that really mean those hounds are under your control, or are they merely, you know their location? So that, another provision in terms of control as well, we're having a discussion, should those hounds be within your sight? Is that part of it? Some people say, well, I can control my hounds if I can talk to them, if I can whistle, etc. Is that practical? We asked people to propose what is a reasonable distance that you could be away from your hounds and still, quote unquote, have them under your control. We didn't get any answers on that, so it was within sight. How far? Right now, there's no limitations whatsoever. As GPS technology improves, I think hounds could be 10 miles away, and they would still be literally, legally under your control. So where the technology has changed the nature of how close handlers or hunters are to their hounds to some degree. I talked with people who predated GPS who said they just had to hustle and try to do the best they could to keep up.
So it's not completely written then, you're still...
No, so we've had 2 drafts, we'll probably have another couple drafts that will pass out of the Senate, go to, presuming it will pass out of the Senate, go to the House, the issue will be taken up again.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment more on the legislative process and hearing from constituents, and just following up on what Senator Bray just said. We have 1,300 bills that are that have been introduced by at least one legislator, and you can imagine that the vast majority of those will go nowhere. They'll quote unquote stay on the wall in committee, and we'll never even take a look at them or take any testimony. So to your concern about a bill that maybe one person wants, sometimes, I don't do this, but sometimes a legislator will do it just as a favor to constituent or to be responsive, and that bill will not go anywhere. There's a lengthy process of getting testimony, doing research, working with lawyers, working with our committees, working with both houses. So, rest assured that the vast majority of those bills will go nowhere. We try to do the most important ones, or what the legislators or our constituents tell us are the most important ones. And there's a long process. So I want to just mention to you, if you're looking up a bill on the legislative website, there's always the as introduced version, which is where it started. And then there are varying versions that the committee works on. As Senator Bray said, they're going through multiple versions of it right now. So what you see on the website might not be the very most recent version. You might have to dig around for it or wait for it to be posted. And then there'll be a version that the Senate passes, and then it will go to the House. And as Representative Smith mentioned, they'll work on it and make changes. So there's a really long process. So I just want to make sure people, I know you understand that, but just remind you of that. And I also just wanted to comment that based on what I'm seeing in my email inbox, people do know about this bill. I've heard from dozens and dozens of constituents about it, so I think that it's fair to say that word has gotten out. There have been multiple newspaper articles last fall about the issue that were written, and I've heard from a lot of constituents on both sides of the issue, or all sides, because I don't think there's just one side versus the other. A lot of people have opinions about our hunting laws and regulations, not just about bear hound hunting, but all sorts of hunting and fishing as well, and trapping and sort of use of our public lands. So I hear from these people. I know that my colleagues hear from these people. So I just want to rest assured to let you know that we are hearing from people with all different opinions and different perspectives. One last thing. Last week was town meeting day. Of the town meetings, I went to many town meetings. The 2 issues I heard about most were hunting and libraries. So I went in person. So the word is out.
Thank you.
Mark Bobin, Addison, Vermont. I'd like to change the topic. We all bought our property with a warranty deed that meant that we owned it. Now, Senator Hardy and Senator Bray have entered a constitutional amendment that would change that. It says the people have a right to clean air, water, and the preservation of the natural, scenic, and cultural values of the environment. I don't believe the cultural value of hunting with dogs is going to be one of those that's going to be preserved. We have other cultural values. When I grew up, we went to school, and anybody that was over 6 years old had a jackknife unless it was hunting season, and he had a straight knife. We took guns to school. We took traps to school. And whatever we collected when we went home, that was enough for dinner. If we brought dinner home one day a week, we were pulling our weight. The second part is the state of Vermont natural resources are the common property of all the people. That eliminates our property rights. That warranty deed is going to be worth nothing. And the last part is the state shall conserve and maintain the natural resources of Vermont for the benefit of all people. The purpose of owning property is to benefit yourself and your own family. And this amendment is going to remove all our constitutional rights to property and the way we want to live. Thank you.
Thank you. why don't you move to the microphone since you wanted to stay back on the other topic for just a second.
Just one more quick comment. You know, to me, it's an unfortunate event what happened in Goshen last year. Nobody wanted it to happen. It shouldn't have happened. But now we're going the other way, and we're changing really the whole culture based on one incident that none of us hound hunters have ever experienced in a long time. And I know, you know, guys that have been hunting with hounds for 60 years, you know, that are they're still going. So, you know, we're changing it over one, and going back to, like you said, with the ethics involved. We're never going to solve that. We're never going to have everybody perfect. There's bad apples out there. There's bad actors. But don't penalize the rest of us who try to do things the right way and try to get landowner permission. I live in Benson, but I go to the mountain to run my bear dogs because I want those big tracts of land and to avoid the people. But the way the language is right now with line of sight, that pretty much eliminates bear hunting right there. They don't work on a leash. It's not possible to go through where they go. They use their nose and they're pulling out of they're a little different than other hounds. They're pulled scent out of the air, so they go very fast, very quick. Sometimes, and if it's older, they go slower. But so it just feels to me that we're changing based on a couple of incidents that got a lot of publicity in a very short period of time, and that's really that's caused it. Thanks.
Senator, did you have a...
Yeah, so I'll just be briefly on the two things. So again, the bill's in development. We've asked bear hound hunters to be in committee. We've had people in committee every day, and we're taking more testimony. We want to hear from people who are knowledgeable in the tradition and the practices. You know, I come from a farm that raised many hounds, so this is not like I'm an anti-hound person. But again, you know, back to that voter's oath, without fear or favor, when the citizens of the state bring up an issue, we owe it to people to say, however uncomfortable it is to have a conversation, we sit down and we work through it. That be optimistic button is because I've seen Vermonters sit down at tables not agreeing on stuff and civilly work their way through things and say, you know, we're all going to live here. This is a great place. We all love it. So let's figure this out. I'm sure we can do that here. We'll be looking for guidance from the hunting community on how to make this the best possible bill we can. The Proposition 9 relating to clean air, clean water, and wildlife, these are all things that are held in public trust now. So again, clean air, clean water, wildlife. We own them all. No one owns them on their own. They're a shared resource. The idea is that we want to say we would express this explicitly in our Constitution so that we have a right to make sure that we continue to have clean air, clean water, and again, shared wildlife resources. Part of the reason for that is, just very briefly, we've relied heavily on the federal government to do laws around clean air and clean water. The current administration has weakened, repealed, rolled back 95 environmental laws. And so I've never met a Vermonter who said, oh, the water is too clean, let's stop working on water. But the federal government is now weakening federal laws that we rely on in order to have clean air and clean water. The idea is to create an explicit shared understanding amongst ourselves that this is something we value, and that's the legal foundation, the constitutional foundation for our own clean air and clean water work particularly. So it is not, we will take careful testimony. There is not one iota of thinking in my mind or the people I've worked with on this so far to say this is going to affect private property rights.
Thanks, Senator. Let's have somebody who hasn't spoken before.
Good morning. I'm Steve Brainio from Orwell. I have a little bit of a background in the firearms industry. I have an FFL license and own a gun shop. Been a hunter all my life, and I'm concerned that this kind of language, over time, as we've experienced with anti-gun legislation, could easily turn into anti-hunting and anti-gun opposition to all of us. Thank you.
Okay, we have only about a minute left. Go right ahead.
New subject. Since 2007, when Fred Singer came to Burlington and talked about climate change and what's going on, I've been following that. And Chris, you brought up something on our first meeting that I'd like to lean on you just a little bit. You mentioned carbon dioxide and pollution, which it isn't. For those of us who've lived with science all our lives, whether it's in agriculture, which I grew up with, or in the military, which you use it all the time, or in medicine, that is not a pollutant. It's the natural compound that all life exists on. So having done some research on this, I'm having a problem coming up with the challenges that everybody seems to be in green on. And so I wrote up some stuff that I want to hand out to the legislators, not to get an answer today, but take a look at some of the stuff of the people that don't agree on this, and then come back and tell us where they're wrong or whatever. So that just the point that I wanted to present, and it's not very long. You can stand up and talk about it all you want, but I did write up some papers for each of these guys, and there's enough of them left over for anybody that wants it.
Okay. Did you want a half a minute? We're actually out of time, but go ahead.
So the half-minute response is CO2, carbon dioxide emitted up into the air it's the primary driver of the whole greenhouse gas effect. It's like putting sort of like a glass high up in the upper atmosphere so that heat is retained. There's a tremendous amount of science that validates that is a well-known effect. That's what's going on. And but CO2, of course, right? Plants take it in. It's an essential component for every living plant. We know that. So when I say pollution, any essential nutrient at the wrong levels can throw the whole system out of whack and become unhealthy. So phosphorus, essential nutrient, excess phosphorus in Lake Champlain, algae blooms. So we're talking about life and balance, not necessarily calling anything a pollutant per se. You need the right levels of things to be healthy. That's true for plants, that's true for animals.
And that's the final word. Thank you so much. Next Monday, we'll be at the American Legion in Bristol, and I hope that you all make plans to come. It's called the Governor's Breakfast, so the governor has been invited. We're not sure yet whether he will be in attendance, but he has been invited, and so we'll see you next Monday in Bristol at the American Legion. Thank you very much for coming today. Our program is brought to you by the Bridport Grange and the Addison County Farm Bureau. And if you see a little bucket out there, a little white plastic bucket, and you want to put $1 in there, please go right ahead and do that. That helps us with the programs each week. Thank you for coming.